Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soul Seekers podcast, where we believe that hunting has the power to transform lives through primal adventure, as we share our mission of mentorship is conservation. To learn more about everything we do, check out our show on Carbontv or go to soulseekersnation.com. Freedom on, everybody, and stay soulful. This podcast is proud to be brought to you by the Crazy Elk Company. Go to crazyoutcompany.com to pick up yourself a tag wallet, custom kill kit, or one of their e-tag systems to throw in your pack this coming hunting season. Use the code SOULFUL with a capital S to save 20% at checkout. This podcast is also proudly brought to you by OnX Hunt. When I first got into hunting, I kept hearing all about public land and different access and how to find different locations to hunt. I was like, well, how are people even identifying all this stuff? Well, sure enough, I came across the number one hunting GPS app, and that is OnX Hunt. If you guys want to get better at hunting and go deeper into your scouting, OnX Hunt is the number one GPS app for that. Join the millions of hunters who trust OnX Hunt to find more game, discover new access, and hunt smarter. It was a game changer for me, and I know it's going to be a game changer for you if you've never used it. If you have used it, you know the power that it holds. Guys, I really hope you enjoy this episode. If you want to know more about OnX, go to onxmaps.com/hunt and check out their app. Be blessed, freedom on, and stay soulful. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soul Seekers podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack, and today I have a episode for you that truly blows my mind when I start talking about this topic with our guest today. And our guest is Jake Olsen out of the state of Utah. He has been a volunteer for the Mule Deer Foundation. He is a professional farrier and what I like to call an amateur deer wrangler. So before we get into this, I want to just tell you that Jake is somebody who I met at the Western Hunt Expo down in Salt Lake City this last year, and him and I hit it off right away. It was an amazing time getting to know him, and the stories that this man can share will truly blow your socks off. I am like, tell me more. I'm like a little kid sitting at the feet of a grandpa around a fireplace, just like, oh, give me more. And so we're going to have Jake talk all about mule deer, all about his mule deer relocating that he used to do, and his amateur deer wrangling. Without further ado, Jake Olsen. What's up, brother? How you doing, man?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing phenomenal. I am fighting a sickness for my children. I'm like super dad right now. It's like fever after fever from one kid to another. I was actually supposed to be up in the state of Washington right now with my wife and kids. We were going to go see the grandparents and all that. And I ended up being like, babe, just go take off by yourself. Get some time alone. I got it. I'm holding it down. We're going super dad this weekend here at the Mac house. And so I'm doing well. I have a sick kid at home again. It feels like it's 2 weeks straight, but we manage. How are you doing, brother? You just got hit by a massive storm last night.
Yeah, it's a storm. It is what it is. It was pretty windy for a little bit, but we're used to it around here. That's too bad about the little ones, though. I can relate. I've been there, done that.
Oh yeah. It well, when you're forced to not be around people for quite some time, that immune system doesn't do what it's meant to do consistently and efficiently because you're not presented with as many viruses and bugs and bacteria and all this stuff. And so my little kids being back in public school this year down here in Texas, it's like I don't even know the word, just a renewal of sickness.
Yep. I'm fine being down and out during the winter, but don't touch me during the spring, summer, and fall. I got stuff to do.
Oh, I hear you. All right, so Jake, give the listeners a little background on yourself about you and your connection with Mule Deer Foundation, and then really we're going to be talking like the main purpose of this podcast is your crazy deer stories that you have, and how you got started into that, and why you got started into it versus like anyone else.
So I've been part of the Mule Deer since 2006 or 7, I believe it was, when I'd been part of Army F for, I don't know, since the late Oh, man, that's going to make me old. I guess probably like 99, 2000 was RMEF. And then was with those guys for 5, 6 years. And then I started going to mule deer only because locally it's their national headquarters. And we did a lot more. We did a lot more projects, had a lot more for me to do, kind of a busybody. So I jumped ship and went over to mule deer just as a volunteer. And it all started with fundraising. And then kind of an education thing, like, helping kids and stuff at the expo. Expo, I have a few more responsibilities, but still a volunteer. And then I was just sitting around, doing nothing like I love to do. And our regional director called me and said, "Hey, we need somebody to be boots on the ground at our urban deer. The Division of Wildlife had started up, kind of represent." And so I said, "Oh, I guess I can do that." That was back in either 13 or 14. And that was it. I showed up one day and I didn't leave. We did it 3 days a week. I didn't leave. It was a long. I did it for about 5.5 years. It was a long run. It ran from November to March, so 3 days a week, usually a Tuesday, Thursday to Saturday. So it really
3 days a week doing what? What were you exactly doing?
So let me give you a little background on urban deer. So we had a massive, whether it be fires in the foothills or urban sprawl, whatever the case be, there was a lot of deer in the cities. And so the Division of Wildlife, took a chance and decided, let's try and move these deer, because it's not a very popular opinion, especially for disease or survival rates or whatever, or just cost. It's not cheap to move deer. So they came up with the urban deer program, and basically it's relocating city deer to the mountains rather than just euthanizing them or, dispatching them. So it was fun. It was a way to try it. Nobody else had ever done it. It kind of blew everybody's mind that people would even try, because they don't have a super high survival rate when you move them. Deer are not tough. They're not like elk where you can kick them out on any city block and they'll fall in with the locals. They're pretty pretty tender. So not real durable. But anyways, so they started this program, and it was SFW had a lot to do with it. Mule deer had a lot to do with it, but mostly the Division of Wildlife in the cities. The cities being willing to pay the bill to remove deer. So it was a problem of conflict with automobiles and human interaction. When they get that close to people in cities, where they're out on your front lawn, or you can feed them, or the kids waiting for the school bus can play with them, it's going to be an issue. One of our towns out here just south, they had 100, and I remember sitting in the meeting, they had 127 automobile collisions on one stop sign in a calendar year. 127. So
that's that's 1 out of every 3 days somebody's hitting a deer.
Yeah, at a stop sign, right? So it is kind of a crossing for them, but they were clear down there. They were 6, 7, 8 miles from the foothills, and not necessarily in fields and stuff. They were in your front yard running down the neighborhood. So it was time to either just the responsibility of sportsmen and the Division of Wildlife, or even cities, just to keep people safe. That's a little bit of a problem. Deer are cool. Come November, they were a little more aggressive, but it was cool. It was time to try something. So they did. They started the urban deer, and it just took off. The volunteers, honestly, we put up traps. They're 4 feet wide, 8 feet long, 4 feet tall, and you bait them in with apples or alfalfa or anything you could get that the deer would really like. But then they just hit a tripwire and you catch them. There are these soft nets inside there, and what blew my mind is I was able to go get my hands on them. You think about it, you're like, oh, they'll only let trained professionals, come in here and handle these deer. Nope. I think gotta give you, everybody was learning together, even the Division of Wildlife. These guys are, I'm gonna toot their horn a little bit. They're amazing. Our Division of Wildlife are amazing. I'm very proud of them. That's not a popular opinion. Everybody's supposed to hate them, by default, but I think they're amazing. I see their efforts. So for them to let, a volunteer come and jump in a trap with a 3-year-old doe that's 180 pounds, 200 pounds, and she's going to kick the crap out of you, oh man, sign me up. So it was interesting, but I remember the first day going, I'm like, I don't know what good I'll do here, but I'll try it. And so I showed up, and I had most people work during the week. So on Tuesday was my first day of that year, and we had some older gentlemen there, and they're like, "Oh, this is how we do it. We collapse it." And I knew right away that wasn't going to be the way I was going to attack this plan. Just because I'd rather just go in there and just, it's not necessarily wrestling. It's more jujitsu. It's more or less just subduing them without them expelling all their energy. So it became this obsession of mine of helping out. Between showing up and early, we'd get there probably like at 5:30 in the morning. The idea was to get the deer out of the traps before sunlight for people walking, dogs, kids going to school. So we'd set them at night, get them out. And so typical morning, you'd meet at 6, 5:36, and then we'd run around all these houses that had all these traps set up because they're in people's front yards, in people's backyards, side yards. I mean, this wasn't just up on side of the hill. This is down traffic going by. So you really don't want them sitting in there. Get there as fast as you could. So we'd go around, check all our traps, had a route picked out of how you just almost like a paper route. You just cruise through it and find all these traps and see who was in where and what. And then you'd go and get them out, and you'd have to hobble them and blindfold them. So you'd roll up on these traps, and if there'd be one in there, from the time they see it, because usually they'd be laying down pretty calm. But then when you roll up on them, they get a little hyped up, rightfully so, and they start jumping. And you don't want them to hurt themselves or anything else. So you'd get to them quick, get the trap door open, and jump in there and grab them. I mean, we'd hobble them. We'd get their.
What is a hobble, by the way?
So a hobble is something that, I mean, are you being serious right now? Is this serious?
You serious, Clark? Well, I'm saying for all the people who don't live the farm life, where you're taking care of animals.
Basically, it's tying one leg to the other.
Okay.
And so whether it be a strap, a leather strap, a buckle, you would want to take front to back. So right front to right rear, left front, left rear.
You serious?
So anyways, you'd hobble, they had these specially made blindfolds that they use for everything, but they slide over and blindfold them. As soon as you blindfold them, they'd calm right down. But you wouldn't want to sit on them. You wouldn't want to wrestle them. You'd really just want to get them and subdue them as quick as you can, more of a jiu-jitsu style rather than wrestling, because the more energy they have when they bound out of that trailer, the better. You know, you don't want to wear them down, and they're awesome animals. I mean, man, you really get a huge interaction with them when you've got a hold of them. Like, it's one thing to see them up close when you're out in the outdoors, but when they're underneath you or on top of you or kicking you, it's a whole different world. So it was intense, you know, while I was kind of learning what we were doing here. And so that would be a morning, you'd go get them out, hobble, pull them out. And then we'd, you know, because we're going to transport them, because this was a pilot program really to try this, CWD is a real thing. It affects everybody. So you would never want to move a deer that was infected with any disease or parasites. So the idea would be to kill all the parasites on them, so you're not transporting any diseases to any other areas, even though 90% of the time we'd move them to the same unit just on the backside. So you really weren't crossing units too much, a little bit here and there, but always in the same area. So it wasn't like we were exposing potentially any diseases or anything to any new deer. They're all in the same units. It's just anytime you have deer conjugate, they're susceptible to that, just like humans, like with your kids going back to school. So it was a process, but we would give them 3 different ways to kill the parasites, whether it be a local across the top, their shots, and then also ear tags. So we figured if we attacked all 3, that would do our best chances of never transporting anything. And then you'd age class and body condition. And I'll tell you, the body condition wasn't great. I mean, they don't have any natural forage or food in the city. They really don't. So most of the time they were really poor. They weren't in good health. Their skin was their coats were dull. They're a little bit underweight. They lived longer, which is weird. I mean, they were some old does that we moved, like 7, 8, 9 years old. And typically around here, the average is about 3 years, 4 years old in the wild. So it was a little older age class, but we'd take a CWD sample to be able to test, and we'd give them a radio collar or a transmitter. So if something were to come up where we needed to go back and get that deer, we knew right where they were at. So, and we could use it kind of migration. And again, this is a pilot program trying to figure out how to do this if it was doable. So we didn't cut any corners. And then we'd get them in the trailer, unhobble them. I'll tell you the wildest stuff always happens when you're taking them hobbles off, right? Because you're trying to shove them through the trap door. Visualize a horse trailer, and then in the middle had a center divider custom built with a door on it that was probably, I don't know, 18 inches wide, 3 feet tall. And he'd open up this door, and you were going to convince this deer to go through it into a dark, I guess, room on the other side, if you will, area. And so you'd have 10 or 12 deer in there, but that's when most people took the kick or the jumped into them, is when you're shoving them through those doors, trying to get them to go through, almost like a cattle chute. But once on the other side, they're with the other deer and they'd calm right down. I mean, most time transporting, they'd just be laying down, chilling. And then you'd have a drop off location where you'd roll up on it, and you'd always want to, they call it a soft release. You try and find like a herd of deer around and drop them with them. You know what I mean? A local set of deer, because they know where the water is, they know where they're going for the winter. And so you try and find a herd of deer that you could just kick them out, and then you'd watch them all, you'd back in and open the doors and watch them all run out and circle each other and sniff each other and then bound off. I mean, that's the way you'd like to see it happen every time. But over time, over the years, I really got a bigger hand on it, to where I was going to meet with cities that wanted to do it. And so I took a little bit larger role than just showing up to move some deer. And then it transpired into people. The people, I mean, you always want to, for me, it changed my life in a lot of ways for who I know. I mean, I got to meet amazing people, whether it be land. I mean, I already know a lot of people. I'm pretty trashy, right? I shoe horses all over this state. So, so I do know a lot of people. I mean, I have a lot of, I don't have any clients, but I got thousands of friends. But so I'm already, whether it be I was in their backyard shoeing their horses or petting their dogs or just catching deer, I'm always in somebody's backyard. So, but it transpired into this monster to where we even caught him at Expo. It turned out, I had some that are family now. I had some folks call me and say, hey, while we're out there, we want to come film and really show what you guys are doing out here. And these people are like family to me now. So it turned in up at Expo to what they'd call kind of like a media day. And so it started out with like 2 or 3 people would show up, let's go catch deer while they're in town for Expo. And by the time this was done, it was like 30, 40 vehicles driving up and down. It was like, it almost like a funeral or something. I mean, it was crazy how many people showed up. Everybody loved it. I mean, it was wild. Not everybody got to get in there because just by volume, we didn't have enough deer, but man, people loved it. Outdoor riders, TV shows. I mean, it was going wild I mean, when are you ever going to get your hands on deer like that and be able to touch them and look at them and really talk about them? So it was more than just moving them. It turned into a huge educational piece. It turned into a great recruitment. I mean, these, man, you wouldn't believe how many friends I have now that just said, I can grab a deer. I'm like, yeah. Because I wore everybody out. It went from everybody'd call me from everything. And then as soon as they'd see my number come across the phone, they're like, yeah, I ain't taking that one. Because I'd be like, hey, I need help. It's 5 a.m. I don't have anybody. I got 10 deer in traps. I need some help. And I wore everybody out. It was a lot. I took my kids, wore them out. My wife was wore out. All my friends were out at the end of 5 years. I mean, it was a lot of work. It was a lot. I mean, you're moving 10 deer. To kind of give you an average, you'd be between 5 and 10 deer per city. And we had 3 cities going at once, all on the same day. So
you were catching that many deer on a daily basis?
On 2 to 3 days a week, yeah. Like Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays. We'd spread them out every other day. So each city, at any given time, I mean, sometimes it was less, sometimes it was way more. Sometimes we'd catch 20 deer. I mean, there were deer everywhere, but at any given time, you were transporting, 10, 15, 20 deer up to a new home up in the mountains and just let them go. I mean, it was pretty wild.
Wow. Okay, I definitely want to hear more about the back end of this release and everything in regards to education. I want to take a step back here, and I want to talk about the actual wrangling of a deer. I heard a story up here in the state of Washington one time about a guy catching a deer and tying roping it around the neck like you would a horse or a cow or something like that, and then it just dragging him. Like they're so strong that it just took off on him.
Yeah,
and so I can't imagine you're walking into some sort of little cage and you're staring down this deer, and a deer's like backing up in the corner, and you're like, what? Like steer wrestling, grabbing it around its head, and just like trying to turn it over as quickly as possible, or what? How does that go?
All right. So anytime I'm fearless, right? I'm like, whatever. If you're going to kick my teeth out, kick my teeth out. You know what I mean? I fight horses every day. So the fact of a 1,200-pound animal leaning on me or kicking at me, I've been kind of desensitized towards it. So for me, it wasn't that crazy. Most volunteers, even the toughest of toughest, I mean, whether it be my big Marine buddies, or, I mean, believe it or not, I've had everywhere from Marine to Navy SEALs come getting these. So, I mean, that's as far as, the toughest of the toughest. But then you have Joe Blow redneck that comes out and just wants to get his hands on a deer. Or Steve from The Office, Steve's going to be like, I'm going to get my mittens on and come out. You know what I mean? He just, it could be anything. But when you get in there, and I'll tell you the worst ones. So bucks were like, whatever. Okay, they're tough. They are tough. They're strong, but they kind of give up. They're kind of sissies, right? Like they'll give up on you. But a 3-year-old doe will send you to your maker. Like it is your closest chance to meeting your creator in an instant. I mean, they are tough. And so I had this Boy Scout group come out one time because they were doing their projects. And these kids asked me, they're like, will they kick? I'm like, yeah, they're going to kick. And I didn't let the kids in there too often. I mean, I let them come in and hobble them after I got them. And they're like, well, do they bite? And I was like, no, they don't bite, right? So I kid you not, no sooner than I said that, I have this 3-year-old doe, and I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? But I mean, because I was, for all intents and purposes, by myself a lot. But I had all these kids, and a doe will jump on you. Like, they kick, like, right? They're almost like a moose when you see them on YouTube or on the channel when they're chasing all these snowmobilers or hikers or whatever. Like, they'll come at you pawing. Like, they are not afraid to throw hands. So you get in there and they will paw at you, kick at you, turn at you. I mean, they can kick they're like little snipers with their legs. But so I go in there and I grab this big doe, and I mean, dude, they are tough. I mean, like, they're gonna jump over the top of you, slam you into the side, drop you in like seconds unless you know what you're doing. Most people get a pretty good slash in the first time they're in there. So anyways, I grab this doe and I get her fairly quick, caught, and I'd like to pick them up where they're off the ground a little bit because you're hunched over, right? You can only stand up to 4 feet. So I like to pick them up and set them at my feet like you would shear a lamb. You know what I mean? Like sheep. Like you'd sit them down, you'd turn their head underneath, tuck their head underneath my arm, and then I'd just hobble them. I'd grab their back legs and pull them up to their fronts and hobble them and then blindfold them. But this one time, I kid you not, it's the one and only time I've ever been bit because the kid asked the question. I've never heard anybody say bite. And this doe, I had her and I was grabbing her back legs and kind of talking. And I was being a little slow, you know what I mean? Because I was trying to explain to him what I'm doing. And this doe reaches up and bites me right on the webbing underneath my ear, like where your ear touches. And she grabs a hold of me, and I mean, she's going to rip my face off. Like, she gets a hold and starts shaking, and I have this hickey on the side of my face. And she just grabbed a hold of me for just a couple seconds and biting on me. And I'm like, the kid's like, I thought they didn't bite. And I said, so did I, kid. So did I. Like, I didn't know they bite. Like that was new.
Were you like biting your tongue during this, like grin and bear it, or were you like, oh my gosh, it just bit me?
I've always tried to keep my mouth under wraps because I'm mouthy, but that one upset me. To say that I was a little offended, I was a little offended. So it was a little bit Western at that one, but dude, it left a good old mark, and everybody's like, "What in the?" It was a good one. It didn't necessarily draw blood, but it raspberried it hard, dude. I was like, I felt like it tore that webbing underneath your, the back of your ear. I'm like, oh man, am I bleeding? The kid's like, nope, you're just kind of soft. I'm like, okay, great.
You're like Evander Holyfield getting bit by Mike Tyson. Like, what?
Yeah. I was like, did my ear just get bit? Like right below it, like right where your beard meets your ear. I'm like, that hurt. So that one pretty good. There's been other times where I've been kicked in not favorable positions. I mean, kicked in the face, kicked in the shoulders, whatever that. It wasn't fun. There's some. I mean, you get kicked in the thighs a lot because you're trying to grab them, You know what I mean? You visualize they're kind of getting away from you. And you grab a hold of them, try and lift them up. They'll thump you with those legs. And I'll tell you, dude, they kick hard. It's not necessarily, it's not necessarily the power, but it's how much power they have for such a small surface, right? It's a small leg. And when they have that much power and punch you like that, you're like, ooh, like it gets a hold of you. Like my legs were always bruised. And then there's like the lice. Like you could get the lice off of them or the ticks and stuff in your beard. And like, because, you're holding them and they're touching your face. Like,
Gross.
that part creeps me out a little more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't just shower anymore. I shower with puppy shampoo, with de-licer and tick shampoo. So, yeah, it got Western. I mean, there's been several times because it couldn't be everywhere. I got pretty good at it for most days and got a little bit of a reputation for it. But the big bucks, like when you got a 30-inch buck in there, and I mean legit 30, okay? We're not stretching tapes here. I mean these huge, big, heavy-horned, 200-inch deer in the city. There weren't tons of them, but there were a few. And when you got something that massive in there, it gets dangerous. You're not going in there with those antlers, right? I mean, they turn on you and drive towards you. You're getting poked. You're getting gored right there in front of your buddies. And so, you'd kind of collapse these traps. They're square, and you'd undo the corners and turn them into a diamond. And then you'd run these bone saws through, these little handheld wire bone saws, and you'd run them around the base of those antlers for a few reasons. One, for your safety moving them, and then two, for the other deer in the trailer. When you put them all together, you don't want them goring each other. So, you saw these antlers off, and the smell of bone being burned is a different. I mean, I could never be a dentist, but that's about as close as I could get to it. It stinks, but you'd have these big 30-inch deer tearing traps apart. I mean, there's several times where I pull up to a trap and it's torn in half. Like they're gone. See ya. That they thrash so hard, going out one end that they just cut right through those nets and be gone. So it did happen. Those 30-inch bucks, man, when they get it, dude, they're strong. I mean, way strong. Now, I've gone in there to battle with them a bunch, and I've definitely done okay. But if you didn't know what you're doing, they would drop you. I mean, they would send you to your maker fast. Not quite as bad as a 3-year-old doe or a 2-year-old doe, but they're aggressive. Like they can get you. So I had lots of volunteers that would call and be like, "Hey, we don't want to do this anymore."
Once is enough.
Yeah. Can I just enter the data? Because you'd always have somebody entering that had good, handwriting, entering all the stats that you pull off on heart rates and weight and body mass. You know what I mean? We had stuff we had to fill out. So it was always good to have volunteers for that, and carrying them on these tarps. You know what I mean? You'd lay them on these tarps and they had handles, and then you'd carry them. So that stuff you didn't necessarily need to be a mugger, but yeah, I had lots of guys. Some of us are a little scared to get in there. We don't want to do this anymore. I'm like, I don't blame you, buddy. So,
Test of courage right there, huh?
Yeah, I had police officers that said, "Nah, I'm good." Like they'd come out, "We want to help," and volunteer, and then they'd get beat up, and they're like, "Nah, I don't think I'll watch this one. No, one's enough." So it can happen. I mean, I definitely I went through a lot of volunteers, but a lot of people were really passionate about it, and some people got really good at it. I mean, they were just like they just like myself, they couldn't get enough of it, so they would just be there every week.
Wow.
I mean, they'd put their lives on hold. But man, I had dogs trying to get me, getting in these backyards. First, I'd have to fight off the dogs trying to get me, like getting a hold of me, because I'm sneaking in people's backyards. I finally got, after having the cops call to me about a dozen times, I finally just put mule deer down the side of my truck, and the trailer was decked out, but the side of my truck. So when I'm checking traps and jumping people, I mean, the homeowners knew I was going to be there, but the neighbors not necessarily. So to see some, idiot like myself running through neighborhoods at 4 a.m. checking deer traps. Dogs just jump the gate. Oh, when they get a dog, you know what I mean? Oh, he must have been at the house last time I was here, you know what I mean? It got wild. And there were some that would be, out of the traps when you got there and they're just chilling. I mean, some of them had tipped their traps over and you had to get them out. Like there was a lot, dude. There's so many. I had animal control guys get their teeth knocked out. Like he got in the face and spit his teeth into his hand, and I'm like, "Well, you're done for the day."
Tag you out.
So,
okay, I got a couple questions for you. First off, if you're cutting off all those antlers, that's a lot of bone. Do you guys get to keep it, or what did you do with it? And then the second part is in regards to the data, is there's a lot of data that goes into. It's not just transporting deer. It's not just catching and transporting. There's a lot more that goes into it. So, can you expand on both those?
Yeah, so the antlers we could keep, absolutely. So it was kind of a perk to the job, right? If you came out and volunteered and you were there, whether it be a 2 point, a spike, or a big old 4 point, not all of them were 200-inch deer, but man, I moved hundreds of 4 points that were, 22-inch frame. I mean, tons of them. And so a lot that goes into mule deer breeding and how well the doe is doing when they take has a lot to do with how much muscle and antler mass they have. And because they were in when the fawns are born, whatever condition she's in when she takes and gives birth is a huge portion of how well these fawns do. So you wouldn't have you'd have kind of crazy framed deer because the moms were poor. I mean, they weren't great in the city. So you had some crazy ones and some big ones. So you had all sorts of size of racks. And so if you were there, I gave them away. So if there were kids there or somebody had kids at home that was helping, I'd cut one antler off and throw it to them. There's yours. Or somebody else or a mom that was out there helping me, I would give them, or the homeowners. I mean, hey, thanks for letting us catch deer in your yard. Here's something cool. Here's an antler from one of the deer in your yard. Stuff like that. So I never really kept them. I can't think of any that I'd even have. I might be able to dig up some like 2 points or something that I've cut off, but anything cool I gave away. So people had it. I mean, I have thousands of memories. These people have a couple. So I gave it to them. The other thing is the data. The data, there was a lot of data entry as far as what they were. I mean, you're age classing them, right? So everything from how old they were to how many, like, so the other thing is that I didn't tell you is they have injuries, right? I'd roll up and some of them had 3 legs because they got hit by cars or broken shoulders or teeth missing. I mean, this wasn't like amazing and neat. It was really sad in a lot of reasons, and that's why we were doing it. I mean, they had. I pulled one off a fence once that was hanging upside down with one of those black wrought iron fences. That was impaled by the fence. I mean, it's not all rainbows and skittles out there catching them. There's a lot of injuries to the deer. But the data, like, what question specifically do you want to know about the data? I could tell you. There's so many different directions I could go with it.
Right. That's a great question. I think one of the biggest things is here you are collecting data, and it's all based off of this idea that there's too many deer in the suburbs. There's too much conflict going on between mankind and nature. So, what type of data research are you guys doing in order to like? So let's see here. I want to make sure I get my words correctly. The program is no longer going.
Correct.
But you learned a lot, like Mule Deer Foundation and what you guys did for research of deer populations, like blew up because of this process. So besides just like aging the deer and dealing with stuff, you have like mortality rates. Like how you catch a deer and release it into nature, is it like 100% going to survive, or how does that work?
Right. Okay, so there's a lot. That's a great question. So the data that we're getting is a lot of different parts. One, what body condition is for urban deer? Are they poor? Are they getting what they need? And the answer, it was answered most often not no. And so it is needed to remove them, whether it be lethal or relocate. So their conditions were poor. So we take data for age class, body condition. We would check them for parasites like lice on their bellies or ticks or whatever to see how many what the parasites conditions were as well. Like, what are we dealing with? What do we have here? So it was a ton of stuff. But then you'd take all that and put a radio collar on them because you want to see how long they last, right? How long are they going to live? And so it didn't have a high survival rate as far as dropping them off. So once you collect all that data, take a blood sample, CWD sample, I mean, all this stuff, and then you go and let them go to kind of see how they do. And you can kind of see over time who did well and who didn't. And so the age class that did well were the 18-month-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old age class did amazing. The pregnant, whether they were pregnant or not, I mean, it was some months it was early, like in November, where you would never even know if they took. December, and then once you started getting into March, you'd know if they were pregnant or not. You know what I mean? So there were signs that you could tell that they were pregnant. So It was illegal, just stuff like that. But when you let them go and you watch the radio collars and they trigger mortality once they stop, I mean, we didn't collar every deer we let go, and I wasn't a big fan. I've been around ranching and agriculture my whole life, and you don't really gauge your herd off your old heifers or your young heifers and your old cows. It's more or less, an average. But we collared so many old deer, like they wouldn't let me pick and choose. The division wanted a clear example of what we're moving. And so I would fight to not waste a collar on a 9-year-old deer or 7 or 8-year-old deer because I knew they weren't going to survive. But they weren't going to survive in the city either. I mean, they're going to die. I mean, one story on the data. I was at the local feed store buying shoes one day, and I had these ladies, Karen and her 2 cousins, and they come rolling up on me deep because they saw my truck out front with all stuff on it, and they just absolutely pummeled me with the deer murderer and yelling at me. Dude, they rolled up on me. I don't know why this popped in my head. It's totally off subject, but they rolled up on me and were going to read me the act. I mean, they were going for it. And I stopped them cold in their tracks because they're like, you're sending them to their death. You're ripping them from their babies, and which wasn't true. But I said, you're right. Every deer I drop off is going to die. They're not going to make it. And I said, you're absolutely right. And I walked away. They just stood there stunned because if they don't die, if these deer don't die that I dropped off, I don't want nothing to do with this because I'm freaked out already. So every deer I dropped off died. So that's where, I mean, every deer, everybody wants to talk about survival rates. Okay, I'll be the first to tell you every deer I dropped off is dead. They didn't make it because deer die every day. They die. They die of old age every day. They die from predators. They die from automobiles, whatever it is, they die. But where the success for me was if that doe gave birth on the mountain. If she dropped those twins or that fawn on the mountain and not in the city, that was a touchdown. That was a win. So I never based my efforts much, never gave it much merit on radio collars and survival rates. If they made it 6 months, 8 months to where they dropped those fawns, that was good enough for me because they're either going to kill them in the city, legally, or they're going to die by automobile anyway. So my biggest thing was let's get these deer out of here to drop their babies on the mountain, not to have their fawns in somebody's front yard. So that's where I put all my energy. But survival rates amongst 1, 2, and 3-year-olds were pretty good. They drastically went down as the does and the bucks got older, but rightfully so. They're gnu. They don't live that long in the wild anyways. I mean, the environment's harsher. The predators are there. And so the other thing is we kind of learned at migration. They didn't migrate real great. They never had to. They just sat in people's front yards all year. So these other deer on the mountain migrate. So you'd really need to get them in with those deer to have them follow them down the mountain or wherever they were headed. So migration became an issue. Survival rates, because these deer are dumb. Okay, they're street smart. They know what an automobile is, but they don't know what a mountain lion is too great. And so there was. I mean, they do naturally, but I mean, they're not. Their senses weren't on overload like these ones in the wild. So I had a lot of cats kill. A lot of cats kill urban deer. Like once you get them up there, I mean, the cats there's one unit in particular where they just smacked. I think I had 11 collared deer in that area, and 9 of them were cat fatalities. So, and I love the mountain lions. I'm not upset by it. I mean, I love cats. I mean, they're pretty awesome. So it doesn't upset me. It's just different. I mean, it's a lot of effort to have your radios turn off because of a cat, but it is what it is. It kind of gave us an idea of where not to drop them. so there's a lot that way.
Right. Like, oh, hey, mark this spot on Onyx and let's keep this in the back of our heads for when cougar season opens up, and let's go get after them.
Yes.
So you're saying that these deer that you were catching in the city were not migratory deer. These are locals.
Yeah, they didn't.
So you're telling me like there'd be like a 20-inch buck just that grew up in Salt Lake City, just like down by the temple.
Yeah, he had a block. Yeah. He secured, the third block down the street. These bucks, they don't migrate. They might move around the city a little bit to water where they can and where they can eat, but they didn't migrate. Where are they going to migrate to? Back on the mountain, then we wouldn't have to move them. So the deer in the cities didn't migrate, and the deer up in the mountains do. You know what I mean? They drop from higher elevations to lower elevations, and we were catching them in the middle. You know what I mean? November, December, January. So we were kind of, depending on what month or late month, I guess you could say, we were either in their winter ground or in transition to their winter ground. And so you'd want to drop them with the local deer, because if you didn't, they're just going to stand there and be like, what's going on? Where do I go? You know what I mean? And so it was different. Like, you didn't think of those things at first, and I was like, oh man, they're not moving. But then you saw them the next year, right? I always saw deer that I dropped off, because you're dropping them with deer that migrate back to where you were. So if they jumped in with the local herd and they'd go down in winter and then they survived the summer and come back up, the next year I'd see collared deer and ear tags going with fawns on them or by them. And so you knew they were making it. And so it was always funny to see these deer running through the trees when you're out there hunting or something, and see ear tags flopping around, big old red ear tags. So had a radio collar on, but they did make it. But if you dropped them with somebody that didn't migrate or didn't know what they're doing, they'd just stand there like, what do you do? I mean, they'd run off and eat and do their thing, but what direction do I go? Where's the water hole at? You know what I mean? These are all things where they'd have to have a local deer kind of show them, because they wouldn't. You didn't think of it till you did it, but that's how it would work. It is pretty well.
There's an old poster of like a bunch of dogs sitting around a poker table, smoking and drinking and stuff like that. I can imagine like this is that only replaced with deer. Like,
Oh yeah.
you're dropping these deer off with a pack of cigarettes and they're just standing there smoking, be like, all right, guys, so what's up?
yeah. They had to figure out what color they were going to wear real quick. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
They got initiated quick by the local deer. Like, local deer, dude, those wild deer are tough, dude. Because they smell funny, right? When you kick them out, because they have all these pesticides on them. Those local deer look at them like, they'd sniff them and circle each other and then paw at them. Like, they'd bump them and they're like, nah.
That's an interesting thing. That I don't think I would have ever thought of that, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are like, oh man. So you're saying that because these urban deer are eating urban plants, and urban plants are constantly bombarded with pesticides or different things, that's showing up on those deer as well?
Well, no, we'd pour it on them. So we,
Okay,
we
gotcha.
put the pour on, and then they had ear tags on that like, if anybody's been around cattle, I mean, they stink when you put them on. You know what I mean? They're pesticides, so it's meant to kill all the bugs in their ears and their face. And then you did an injectable that would kill like worms or anything going on inside them. And then you had a pour on that you'd pour down their back, just like you do with sheep or cattle or anything, and it would kill all the parasites on them. But when you release them, they have all that on them. So these deer would circle. I'd sit there and watch them, and they'd circle, and then boom, instantly they'd start pawing at them and kind of bumping them, and like, you ain't part of us. You smell funny. You know what I mean? Like, it was in. And then of course they stood there like lost puppies. Like, what do we do now? And they'd still follow them, but there was definitely a pecking order right out the gates. But it was interesting, dude. Them city deer. I tell you what. The urban deer, they didn't do too great out in the backcountry, and the backcountry deer don't do too great in the city. So it's two different worlds. I mean, they're definitely on two different worlds for that spectrum, anyways.
Do you think
But
that has a lot to do with like nurture versus nature? Because
absolutely,
there's this concept of instincts, but yet what's
yeah,
going on?
it's their sensories, right? So their ears, their eyes, their nose, they're at tens in the wild, right? They are at tens. You don't see the body language with deer in the wild that you do deer in the city. Like, they're just like, whatever. They might see a dog and get all upset, or a vehicle, but dude, they're relaxed. They're like, whatever. They were born into chaos. It's not a big deal. You know what I mean? Basically, they were born with cars driving by them and people that looking at them and dogs barking at them, and nobody got hurt.
And horns honking and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Where in the wild, they have cats jumping on their grandma, grandpa's, aunts, whatever. You know what I mean? They get coyotes, whatever it is, bears. I mean, they get their sensories going big time, dude. Their senses are at a 10. So, yeah, it's totally different.
That is a really interesting perspective, because, on this podcast, when we're talking about how like nature's healing, nature is renewing and all this stuff, we always talk about how, you need to remove yourself from the buzz of society. But that, talking about it as an actual tangible buzz, like out in the wilderness, unless a tree falls or something snaps or the wind is blowing, it's silent. And so your senses are on point all the time. But when you're used to hearing footsteps behind you from whatever, or a car screeching or engine going, or it's like you learn to tune out. Your ears don't work as well, because you're like, oh, that I know what that is, and that's not going to bother me.
Right. Yeah, they're desensitized big time. So they have to learn. I mean, they had to learn, but like again, we're not really, for me anyways. I mean, there's a lot of controversy surrounding moving deer, right? Because of disease, CWD. And I could go on and on. And dude, I could do a whole nother podcast about CWD and deer management that we've learned. I mean, I could go on forever as a volunteer, not as a biologist. A guy on the ground doing it, seeing it for myself, not reading it out of a book. But there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, the sensories of them are, crazy. And so for the survival rate to live forever in the wild, I'm not going for that. That's not where I'm headed with it. It's if they can drop those fawns and complete that cycle out of the city, that's where I put my money. It wasn't ever for me, let's make this doe last 2 years, 3 years and replenish the deer herd. That's never going to happen. I mean, let's be realistic. But what can happen is in that first 6 months of being out in the wild, up on the mountain, they can drop those babies. And those babies now become part of the local deer herd that can follow, that can migrate, that are completely oblivious to city life and what that entails. And so that's where the cycle's broke. And that's where you can't put anything tangible on it, right? You don't know if that doe had fawns. You don't know. So you don't know the success rate of it. Like it's just a what if until you went the next year and saw a doe that had 2 ear tags and a radio collar on and she had fawns. You know what I mean? That's the only time you could ever gauge your efforts. They're going to die in the city regardless. Like whether we kill them, with our local guys that archery hunt them, you know what I mean? They're paid to archery hunt them. That's a real thing. Or whether a car hits them or whether they die of disease, whatever. They're going to die in the city. But if they can at least break the cycle, that's where the money's spent. You know what I mean? Breaking the cycle of being born in the city. That's where I put my money in on it. So
Interesting. Okay, so I love hearing this. So the program's no longer.
yeah, it's not that we got rid of it. We just shut it down. And because of a few reasons. One, money, right? It's expensive. It's not cheap. Volunteers fronted a big bill of that. If you had to man it up and have people show up as a job, it'd be really expensive. But you're paying for collars for every deer. You're paying for a collar or a tracker for every deer. All the pesticides, the Division of Wildlife's time and money, as far as employees plus their vehicles. I mean, there's a lot that goes into all the data, all the blood work. I mean, there's a lot of hands that this thing goes through to make it possible. So the money is a big one. The other one was CWD. There was a lot of heat from other states because I was getting calls personally. People were looking me up and calling me from California, from Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Idaho, Montana, in these city officials. I mean, citizens. I mean, you wouldn't believe the phone calls you're getting. Like, are you able to do this? We want to do this. And so it became popular, and it put it on the National Deer Alliance's. It put it on their agenda to talk about it, and everybody frowns upon it because of disease, and rightfully so. That's a big concern. I felt like we did an amazing job of not transporting disease or doing any of that. I mean, you'd never want to. So it became one of those things where, well, hey, we've got away with it this far. We got them out of the city. It's manageable now because we really did get them out. I mean, you're talking we removed 500-600 deer per city, right? Or close to or more. Some cities were 1,000. I mean, we moved a lot of deer. And so it wasn't needed necessarily anymore, and it was way more manageable at the time. So we kind of just phased it out. I mean, it wouldn't be wise to have that many traps, that much manpower for something that we weren't catching as many deer. But the other thing is we didn't ever want it to get shut down. So if there ever become a day where we needed to come back to it, we have that option. So it didn't get shut down. We just shut it down. We just, kind of shut the doors for a minute. The other thing is we passed a lot of legislation here in Utah with the cities and did a lot of changing the way perspective for people. So we are now able to hunt the foothills of these towns, right? The 3 major towns that we were doing this in, we can hunt those. So sportsmen and women can go out and hunt these deer while the numbers were out of the city. They're still in the city. They're still around. I mean, I have them out in my front yard in the city. They're not in the volume they were. And so now we can hunt them. They're part of the extended archery, as we call it. So sportsmen are managing them now the way it should be, not cars.
Which
So
brings in money rather than having to cost money
right.
for a program.
Well, which is an asset, not a debt. But the other problem is man, you wouldn't believe the logistics going into getting people to let you. I mean, do you know how many arguments and good fights I've been in part of, from one neighbor hating the deer and wanting the traps in their yard? She wants flowers for the first time in 30 years because the deer won't be eating them, to the neighbor that loves seeing them out front. Like, it's a battle. Like, it's almost like, political views here. Like, dude, the neighbor across the street loves the deer out front and doesn't care about her flowers. And then the lady across the street wants her flowers. And so there's this you're killing them, you're hauling them off, and people get attached to them. Somebody in the neighborhood absolutely just read me the act for moving this big buck they've been feeding for years and years. And it was their family member and all this. I mean, there's a lot of sentimental attachment to the local deer for folks. I mean, that's a whole world I could get into.
That's trippy. Like, yeah, people are naming deer. People are claiming them as their own and having ownership over a wild animal. And
dude, I've had kids teach me some new words, buddy, because the kids love them and the parents want them gone. And I watched this 16-year-old girl. Boy, dude, she laid it down better than any sailor I've ever heard. Like, she made a point, dude. I'll never forget. I was like, wow, you're pretty passionate. Like, it's just, she's emotionally she was attached to these deer. And so, dude, it's crazy. There's just so many landowners getting upset. I had people letting them out. Like, people, and they didn't realize I had cameras on them, because all my, I had those satellite cameras where you could have it text your phone, so I knew where it was what.
Yeah.
And dude, people letting them out. I mean, neighbors jumping their neighbor's fence and jumping back there and letting them out. Like, there's so many things that went on. I mean, it was just a whole nother world. So,
are these deer screaming or making noise when they get trapped? Kind of like a fawn in distress type sound?
No, the volunteers were. Most of it come from the volunteers screaming. Oh, you know what I mean? It was. I mean, you try to remain quiet, but the other thing is, I mean, like, you want to talk, I know you get big into recruitment, and we could go on a whole another 10 hours of this, but the amount of recruitment for these young kids to be able to get a deer in their hands, I mean, do this stuff that change your life. Like, people get their hands on them and actually get to pet them or put ear tags in or run pesticide or, take vitals, whatever. Like, it's pretty cool to have these deer in your hands. Like, it's not something you get to do every day. So, I mean, there was a lot of people that were really passionate, and a lot of positive come out of this. Dude, so me in particular.
I totally get that, how it gets in your blood, right? So
yep.
I heard Netflix is going to come out with a series called Mule Deer King, to be similar to Tiger King, but Mule Deer King starring Jake Olsen. So
I was like, wait, what? Oh yeah, I was like, hold on a minute, I got to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, no, like you're saying, the minute that people get to experience something up close and personal rather than from a distance, it's not just a picture in a book, it's not just an animal on a hillside. Their lives are impacted, and now all of a sudden they care. And whether or not they turn into animal activists, or whether or not they turn into biologists, or they turn into hunters because they're like, I want to experience these animals close again. Like, you're impacting lives.
Yeah, visualize this. So I remember this day well. So I had what you would call an activist. I just call her, she's hard to handle. Let's put it that way. A Karen that's very passionate, but she loved the deer. And once she understood that I love the deer as well, there was one particular day where I had, let's just say, a very passionate lady helping me and her kids that had a totally different view of what hunters do and conservationists do. And then I had the most diehard killer you've ever met in your life that was born as, some alter ego, mountain lion guy that hunted everything. And so I had these two in my truck, and we were catching deer together. And everybody come to the consensus that we love the deer. It's not, you know what I mean? When you can have a sportsman work right alongside an activist, that's pretty, and that's being a loose term, activist, but very passionate. It was wild. And there's a lot of days where you'd stand in the back of that trailer and look these deer right in the eyes, because they just stand there and look at you, right? Like, what's this guy's next move? Dude, it's pretty intimate with these deer. Like, dude, you can see right to their souls. I mean, dude, and they can see to yours. Like, they know. Like, there's so many days where I would open up those gates. I have video. I could send them to your phone right now as we're talking. Like, I would literally just walk back there and be like, dude, you're gonna be good. Like, here we go. You know, when you guys go, like, almost like weird fanboy talking to them, like, you guys are gonna do great. Pepper, you know,
Well, you're a farrier, so horse
yeah.
whispering, right?
Ah, yeah, I like horses. I get along with them pretty well most days.
But like the connection, a soul connection. We're all made by the Creator. We got this connection
Yeah,
in the universe, and like looking
yeah,
this is why I always was told, don't ever look an animal in the eye when you're hunting it, right? Because
yeah.
they'll recognize your intent.
Right. Well, I kept my body language. Like, I became pretty adept to how I moved and what I did. You know, I didn't flail my hands. I didn't move quick. I moved up the side of the wall. And pretty soon I could handle these deer pretty easy just by my body language, but them reading me. Like, they wouldn't jump all over me. They wouldn't move when they're in the trailers, you know what I mean? So I'd move in there and move them around or however, but I'll never forget that day when you can have complete polar opposites come together and move deer. That's pretty cool. I mean, polar opposites, completely different opinions, lifestyles, everything could not get further apart on the spectrum, and they're working together to move them. I mean, it's a pretty cool deal. So everybody can find common ground in moving deer. I mean, I could have the most passionate animal lovers to the most hardcore hunters. And, you know, everybody wants to talk about being super cool and tough and how neat we are. You're right. We're all egotistical, crazy hunters, and that's what drives us. But, dude, it would drop some grown men to their knees pretty fast to be that passionate with wildlife and be in the middle of them. Like, I've seen guys get choked up and messed up a little bit because it's so intimate. Like, you're holding these animals and you're trying to, you know, help them and let them go or have to put them down because they have broken legs and they'd been hit by a car, you know, weeks before. Like, it's not all glory. I mean, it's there's some sad days in there, but dude, it's so to walk in there and see them, like, dude, it's pretty passionate. Like, even the toughest of the toughest could have a softened heart doing urban deer. Like, you really could.
Doing urban deer catching with Jake Olsen. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. Jake, I could sit in here and listen to you tell stories for days, brother, for absolute days. You're a warrior of a human being and somebody who I'm very, very glad to be able to call a friend and a brother. So thank you,
Oh,
man.
thanks. That's nice of you. Well, I appreciate it. Feelings mutual. But the other thing is, real quick, dude, you can come do this just because we're not. That's the thing about staying involved with conservation is like you can fly out here. I'll pick you up and we can go collar deer. We can go collar elk. I mean, we still have so many studies going on right now, and Utah allows their volunteers to get hands on. And I think it's genius because anybody that wants to take time off work to go and help wildlife and you don't get to interact with them or have those moments with them isn't planting the seed to be able to be like, hey, I want to do this later on. You know what I mean? People that come out and actually get to put hands on elk or bison or antelope or whatever and put collars on and enter vital signs and body, dude, it's awesome. And they get to, you know, all of it. The only thing I haven't let them actually see other volunteers, I'm not going to put my name in there because I have done quite a bit, is draw blood. Outside of drawing blood, you can come put the ear tags in. You can mug them. You can put their blindfolds on. You can let them go. You can have hands on come out and volunteer and see what the Division of Wildlife does around our parts, and you can come do that. You can come out with your kids and really give them a different side of not just hunting, but the other side of the preservation and the conservation side of it. And it breeds a different human being once you've done it. Like, it changes. You can say it doesn't, but it does. It changes the way you think and feel about wildlife.
When you all of a sudden care about another life more than just your own, it really leaves impact. Like becoming a father or a parent or whatever is like, oh, now I need to always be thinking about these other living souls. So
Right.
truly impactful, truly impactful. Jake, thank you so much, brother, for coming on, sharing some stories. Guys, and listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up, like it, share it, subscribe. Go give Jake a shout and say thank you so much for coming on this podcast. Just a reminder that we have a December 10th event in Mukilteo, Washington to raise money for Blood Origins nonprofit. If you want to come, it's free for all. It's free for anyone, and all ages are welcome. Food and beverages are available for purchase, and we're going to be having raffles and silent auctions, and we got some amazing stuff that you all can win. Man, dude, killer episode. I'm like, here we go, baby. Let's
I
do
didn't
this.
even touch it. Yeah, I didn't even touch into half the stuff. I mean, it's just a lot. It's a lot. There's a lot of stories, a lot of crazy stuff. So
Well, we're gonna have to get you on as a returning guest here soon. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Soul Seekers Podcast. I'm Johnny Mack. Be blessed. Remember that hunting has the power to transform lives through primal adventure, and that you can never outgive good, as mentorship is conservation. Be blessed, everybody. Freedom on, and stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast and want to support the show, you can always like, share, subscribe, and leave a rating, as it helps us share our mission of mentorship is conservation. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of Soul Seekers Nation as we transform lives through primal adventure. If you want to get more connected with the podcast, check out the Soul Seekers Nation Facebook group, as I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. So stay tuned and stay soulful.